safe to walk or bike, and therefore anyone who might have been keen to walk or bike thinks, well, it's not safe, therefore I have to drive, making it less safe for anyone who might be keen to walk or bike. I mean, I wouldn't like any of the children in my family to be biking in Auckland. I wouldn't feel it was safe.
Really?
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, the way I've seen cars behave around cyclists, I don't think it's safe on Auckland roads as a
Until
cyclist.
there are proper bike lanes with real separation, I agree.
Unless the infrastructure is there.
How's the what do you make of the infrastructure in Wellington, Stephen, when it comes to things like bike lanes? Because this is a bit of an issue. I mean,
I bike to work, but I wouldn't want the kids to.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
And why do you bike to work?
It's quick. It takes me 9 minutes.
Right.
It's much quicker than driving. The streets are clogged up now, and biking, they're not enforcing the rules against bikes on footpaths, so quite a lot of it is relatively safe. It's just a few areas where you have to take your courage in your hands. Mm. But I don't know. I mean, it might be that Wellington's not typical. I think there's a lot of kids busing and walking to school in Wellington.
Mm. Hey, we have a really big response to the issue about university traditions, and quite a wide variety. Satire of democracy has been a necessary and entertaining part of democracy since Aristophanes in the 5th century. Thank goodness. I agree, someone says, with the idea of call-out culture. It's quite painful. Comedy isn't going to be funny to everyone. If you don't find it funny, don't go back, but don't get outraged until you've seen it. Another one, I agree with Stephen on the freedom of speech. Too much restriction on freedom of speech merely due to dear offending, and there are many others who don't agree as well. So I really, really appreciate all your responses from all points of view this afternoon on the panel. Just finally, I found this interesting. This article from RSN today, originally from the BBC, a study found that being optimistic had quite an effect on your lifespan. In short, positive people were more than likely to live to the age of 85 or more. The theory is that optimists may find it easier to control emotions and so be protected from the effects of stress. I don't know where you stand on this, Joe, but I've got to say to myself, I have always been an optimist. None other. It's always been golden days for me. Every day, every week. What about you?
I think I'm a pretty optimistic person. And it was interesting. I mean, the difference is sort of double figures percent. It's 10 to 15%.
It's huge.
You can live longer. It's a huge difference, which shows you the incredible effect that stress and negativity can have on your health. But I actually thought about this quite a lot, because I thought realistically, even if they proved that optimism meant you lived for a shorter period of time, I perhaps would still rather live for 80 years feeling really positive about everything than 97 just being a real downer and a buzzkill.
What's your, if I may ask, Stephen, what's your natural bent? Do you sort of lean towards the optimist side, or do you lean towards the sort of the glass half full part of life?
As a lawyer, you're paid to be looking out for problems and risks, so it's actually, I think lawyers' families will say that it's sometimes hard for them not to be pessimistic, but I am optimistic. For those who want to follow this up, there's a writer called Martin Seligman.
Yep.
And he has written 2 very good books, about one called Learned Optimism.
Read it. Fantastic writer. Stephen Franks, Joe McCarroll, fantastic panel. Very grunty. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, Steve Hanson's Rugby World Cup bombshell. Owen Franks didn't make the cut, so who are the chosen ones? The Waitangi Tribunal slams the Crown for the pollution in our rivers and lakes in a landmark report. National says a new round of gun laws will turn the goodies into baddies. The police scoop up a swag of luxury goodies, property and cars, flash ones, allegedly bought with dirty money. NZQA fronts up on the now defunct Kite Business School. Who's marking its ex-students' assignments, and where are their diplomas coming from? The on-again, off-again foreign aid to fight the Amazon fires is apparently on again, and the baby elephant zoo ban.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leiatawa tēnei. An 8-month investigation into money laundering has led to a police swoop on several expensive Auckland houses and the arrest of 6 people. After searching properties in Remuera, East Tamaki Heights, Papatoetoe and Karaka, the police took control of $9 million worth of houses and cars, including a $280,000 Bentley. 3 Remuera properties worth more than $7 million in total have been restrained, and about $1 million in cash and bank accounts have been frozen. 3 men and 3 women have been charged with dozens of counts of money laundering. The police believe the money was derived from drug dealing and other sources and say there may be more arrests. The mother of a Mangawhai toddler says she completely trusted the man accused of murdering the 2-year-old. Aria Roberts died while in the care of her mother's former boyfriend, Aaron Archer, who was on trial in the High Court in Auckland. Today, her mother, who can't be identified, told the court she was at the supermarket when Mr. Archer called to tell her Aria wasn't breathing. She said she raced home, but it was too late. Her voice has been disguised.
I was just screaming in the house, like, where is she? And so I found her in my bedroom. She was covered with a dressing gown and she was just very pale. I picked her up and then I realised that she was very limp.
The mother said she completely trusted Mr. Archer, who maintains he was playing with the child when she accidentally hit her head. A former trustee who admitted draining the bank account of a Far North Māori trust has been jailed for more than 5 years. Stephen James Henare was a trustee of the Pārengarenga 3G Trust when he and his sister stole more than $1 million intended for forest management. Much of the money was spent on gambling. At today's sentencing in the High Court in Auckland, Justice Muir said the offending had a high level of planning and Henare only stopped when the cupboard was bare.
He abused his responsibilities as trustee to fund his own lavish lifestyle, while those he was called to serve suffered and continue to do so.
Justice Muir sentenced Henare to 5 years and 2 months in jail. Forest and Bird says the government's decision to stop a West Coast hydroelectric power scheme is a win for conservation, kayakers and future generations. West Power has been denied permission to build and operate the scheme on the Waitangi River. A Forest and Bird spokesperson, Jen Miller, says the decision will help to protect one of the country's most outstanding scenic rivers for future generations. But the Mayor of Westland, Bruce Smith, says it's the wrong decision.
When the alpine fault shifts, which it will up one day, we are completely isolated, and without sufficient power to run the coast, we're in deep trouble. And this was a scheme that ticked all the boxes for regional development, environmentally conscious. It ticked the boxes for the move towards self-sufficiency.
The Westland Mayor, Bruce Smith. The opposition leader says the National Party is unlikely to support the second tranche of gun legislation because it's targeting law-abiding citizens and being soft on criminals, gangs and extremists. The Prime Minister has said the legislation being introduced next month is designed to stop gang members being able to access guns while making sure fit and proper people are still able to. This afternoon, Simon Bridges said his party could be swayed to vote in favour of it if the government changes its focus to criminals and gangs.
If the government shows, for example, with firearm protection orders, some of the things we've urged them to do, that this isn't about law-abiding New Zealanders, actually also about getting at gangs, criminals, extremists who have guns.
The Police Association, which supports the legislation, is calling on Mr Bridges not to play politics. The Waitangi Tribunal is slamming the Crown for letting rivers and lakes get so polluted and for preventing Māori co-management of fresh water. The Tribunal has just released a landmark report on fresh water and geothermal resources, highlighting what it says is a raft of failures in the Resource Management Act. Our Māori news correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin reports.
The tribunal says the Crown has breached the treaty by failing to protect fresh water and not doing enough to make Māori part of the decision-making process for such resources. It's calling for a new co-governance body to be created. The tribunal recommends the Crown recognise Māori proprietary rights to fresh water and develop some form of redress. It also wants more money put into restoring fresh water and helping Māori take part in the RMA process. Ko Lee Marama McLaughlin, tēnei.
The artist Dick Frizzell has withdrawn a new T-shirt line from social media because of objections from the Wellington iwi Ngati Toa Rangatira. The shirts have the words of the Ka Mate Haka on them, something the iwi says it did not give its permission for. Under the Haka Ka Mate Attribution Act, any publication of the haka for commercial purposes must acknowledge its composer, the 19th century Ngati Toa chief Te Rauparaha. Ngati Toa Rangatira says it is not surprised people are trying to capitalise on the haka ahead of the Rugby World Cup and the issues being considered by iwi members. Mr Frizzell has not responded to requests for comment. It's 5:05. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen concedes they're taking a risk, selecting injured lock Brodie Retallick in the Rugby World Cup squad. Retallick dislocated his shoulder in the drawn test against South Africa last month and won't recover in time for the start of the tournament in Japan next month.
We don't expect him to play in the round robin, but we're reasonably sure that, with no disrespect to anyone else in our pool, that we should make the quarterfinals. From there we don't know, so at this point we've rolled the dice to take him for that quarterfinal and we'll see what happens from there.
Owen Franks, Liam Squire and Ngani Laumape are the major omissions from the 31-man squad. Rafael Nadal has comfortably avoided becoming the latest men's casualty on day 2 of the US Tennis Open in New York. The world number 2 needed a little over 2 hours to beat Australian John Millman in straight sets. Fellow top seeds Dominic Thiem, Stefanos Tsitsipas, Karen Khachanov and Roberto Bautista Agut have all crashed out in the first round, opening up Nadal's half of the draw.
When you start the tournament, you have difficult opponents in front and you need to go on court and respect every single opponent. I went on court today against a tough opponent, knowing that I need to play well to win, and if you play bad, you can lose.
Rafael Nadal. And former Manchester United forward Wayne Rooney has again been suspended for one Major League Soccer match in the US for elbowing an opponent. That's the news.
The money.
I don't see any issue whatsoever with the donation of $150,000.
The pay.
It's not good enough for MP salaries to get further and further away from what the rest of the country and our citizens are earning.
The forgotten.
Is it okay for 27% of New Zealand schoolgirls missing school every or most month with debilitating symptoms?
Morning Report with Corin Dann and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, why are numbers of Pacifica and Māori staff at universities so low? We talk to the newest inductees to the Music Hall of Fame. And after 10, UK ITV News host Tom Bradby on his latest political thriller, Secret Service. Join me, Lynn Freeman, and for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel. Long fine spells, a few showers. Waitangi to Kapiti, including central high country. The odd shower from Manawatu northwards tonight, showers becoming more extensive tomorrow. For Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, mainly fine weather. Isolated showers about Bay of Plenty tomorrow and about Wellington and South Wairarapa tomorrow night. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine tonight. Tomorrow afternoon and evening, brief rain or showers spreading north with a southerly change. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow with brief heavy falls. Early morning thunderstorms are possible in Fiordland. Otago and Southland, mainly fine tonight. A period of rain tomorrow morning with snow above 500 metres, then mostly clearing, but further showers about Clutha and coastal Southland. Chatham Islands, mainly fine, showers late tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 9 minutes past 5.
Thank you, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Police have arrested 6 people and snatched up millions in assets, including posh property and flash cars, following a big money laundering investigation in Auckland. It's been an 8-month operation and the police have put a freeze on the sale of 3 properties in the upmarket suburb of Remawera, and they've also frozen several bank accounts. Detective Senior Sergeant Wayne Gray from the Financial Crime Group details the cash and assets netted in today's haul.
We have $9 million worth of assets, near enough, that have been restrained today. That includes a cash sum of approximately $250,000, in excess of $700,000 through bank accounts, a number of vehicles, and also residential properties across Auckland worth in excess of $7 million.
So what kind of vehicles are we talking about here?
Yeah, so there's a Bentley vehicle, 2 Mercedes and a Porsche.
So top end?
Executive vehicles, yes.
Yeah, okay. So where does the money come from to purchase these assets?
Our investigation has focused on money laundering, basically. So this is money that we've been targeting a group that have been moving money for organised criminal groups, and they are professional third-party people who are assisting these groups to make their money look legitimate.
Does the money come from drugs originally?
So the money in this operation has come from a number of crime types, which does include drugs, but there are a number of crime types that have been involved in this investigation.
Can you give us a bit more of an idea of what kind of crimes?
Unfortunately not. This matter is before the courts. As I say, there's a number of crime types. We're not just focusing on drug offending. And actually our investigation focus has actually just been on the money and the movement of money and these third-party offenders.
So when you mention drugs there, is that drugs coming from offshore or manufactured here in New Zealand?
It's just, again, the investigation is ongoing. I don't want to go into too much detail around the drug offending. That investigation continues. Like I say, our focus really has been on these third-party money launderers and making sure that we can target those and that the people who are moving money for these criminal groups know that they're in our focus, basically.
So when you say third-party money launderers, these are people who have set themselves up specifically for this task, to clean criminal money?
That's correct, yeah. So these people have set themselves in a position where they are taking money from a number of different sources, hence the reason why I say the money comes from a number of backgrounds. So that's been our sole focus, is looking at the money side of things.
So what can you tell us about the people you have arrested? Are they professionals? Are some of them in accountancy or law or any of those types of professions?
Yeah, unfortunately I can't go into what their professions are at this stage. As I say, the matters are before the courts. What I can tell you is, as I say, these people have set themselves up in a position to be able to assist organised criminal groups. So our focus has been on targeting those for, the confidence of the public.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Detective, but I imagine you'd need a particular skill set to basically clean up the kinds of money, the volumes of money that you're talking about here. Would that be a fair assumption?
No, not really. As I say, our focus has been on these offenders and the money. It doesn't mean to say you have to have a particular skill set to move money around. You just need to be able to deal with funds for people.
So can you give us a bit of a 101? How has the money allegedly been laundered here?
Yeah, unfortunately I can't go into the details of how money has been moved around, and as you can appreciate, the matters are still before the court at the moment.
What kind of relationship do you have with luxury car providers? Obviously there's a bunch of cars listed here which are worth top dollar. Do they get in contact with you when they see any suspicious activity?
Yeah, unfortunately, again, I can't really go into that. That's part of our investigation phase. So that's not something I'm able to go into, unfortunately.
Are you looking further than the people that you have arrested today? Will more arrests follow?
Well, what I can tell you is that our investigation is ongoing. We're at an early phase in it, and we will continue to look into how money and funds have been moved around, and should other people be identified, we will be targeting those people as well.
How much dirty money and assets do you think are out there? Is this a common problem in New Zealand?
Money laundering is a worldwide problem for law enforcement, and is something that is being targeted across the world, not just in New Zealand. So we are doing exactly the same as any other law enforcement agencies throughout the world.
Have you worked with any other countries in this operation?
In terms of other countries, unfortunately, again, I can't really go into that. It's part of our investigation phase, so I don't want to go into that just now.
Can you put it in perspective for us? You've seized about $9 million worth of assets. Where does that fit in the scheme of things in terms of the scale of this operation?
So look, for us New Zealand Police, this is a significant day for us in terms of arresting offenders. But in terms of how it fits in the scale of things, there are a number of other operations that are ongoing, police-wide and nationwide. This is just one of those investigations. And I suppose one of the things in terms of us targeting, A, this crime type, and B, making sure that the public have trust and confidence in what we are doing.
Are all those arrested New Zealand nationals?
All the people that have been arrested today have been in New Zealand for a number of years, is what I can tell you. And they have different statuses. So some of them are New Zealand residents and some of them are New Zealand citizens.
And that is Detective Senior Sergeant Wayne Gray, who's from the Financial Crime Group and was involved in, obviously, that operation today. All Blacks coach Steve Hansen dropped a major bombshell in his World Cup squad, leaving out veteran prop Owen Franks and picking one Test flanker Luke Jacobson as they seek an unprecedented third straight title. The other selections were largely predictable, with some World Cup first-timers in and some unlucky losers. Rugby reporter Joe Porter was at the announcement at Eden Park with cameraman Nick Munro.
Prop Owen Franks has played 108 tests, won 2 World Cups and has been a cornerstone of the All Blacks scrum since debuting a decade ago. However, the 31-year-old has been surpassed by the likes of Nepo Laulala and Atu Morley. Coach Steve Hansen says telling Franks he wasn't going to Japan was one of the hardest calls he's had to make.
Yeah, really tough call, because of the nature of who he is and what he's done for the All Blacks in the past. He's a real strong character, Owen, and he's delivered time and time again for the All Blacks. So to have to call him and tell him that his dream's over was tough, but he had to do it the right way. He had to do it with a lot of honesty and a lot of empathy, and to his credit again, and the mark of the man, he made it easier than it possibly could have been.
While Frank's World Cup dream is over, there's some hope for flanker Liam Squire, who is left out of the squad, but will be available should injuries strike the likes of Kieran Reid, Adi Savia or Sam Cane. While the omission of Liam Squire wasn't seen coming, it was almost as big of a surprise to see rookie Luke Jacobson named for the big dance. Coach Steve Hansen says the Chiefs' Lucy is a star in the making.
Well, he's mature way beyond his years as a player and as a person, in fact, and he's an ex-under-20 captain, so understands the game, understands how to play it. He's got a real physical presence, and as we saw through Super Rugby and even as late as Saturday when he played for Waikato, he's good with the ball in hand.
And the Crusaders All Black production line rolls on with rookie wings George Bridge and Sevu Reece named to play at their first ever World Cup.
My mum was asleep, so I had to ring her a couple of times. So, but yeah, my dad, because obviously my mum was sleeping, so my dad was the first one to find out. And he got so emotional, and obviously a big achievement for not just me, but my whole family back in Fiji.
Geordie Barrett, Ben Smith and Rico Ioane round out the back three. While there was ecstasy for the World Cup debutants, there was agony for Ngani Laumape, the unlucky loser in the midfield, with Ryan Crotty, Sonny Bill Williams, Jack Goodhue and Anton Leonard-Brown preferred. Injured lock Brodie Retallick is in despite the fact he'll miss the pool games, meaning Patrick Tuipulotu gets in as the fourth lock alongside Sam Whitelock and Scott Barrett. But what do punters make of the squad? We bumped into the New Zealand Heartland 15 down Queen Street. What do you make of it?
Yeah, not bad, not bad.
Did you expect to see Luke Jacobson in there?
Oh, was that him and Squire, wasn't it? So, yeah, I guess so.
And what did you make about Owen Franks being left out?
Yeah, big call. He's been there for a long time. It's a bit of a shock, but I think the other boys there will have to step up and do the job.
All Blacks are favourites for the World Cup, you think?
Bloody oath, mate. I tell you what, up the bush for the Heartland Championship as well, eh?
That confidence is well placed, with Hansen pumped about the chance to win an unprecedented third straight crown.
Oh, look, it excites everybody, whether it's your first World Cup, or your second one, or your third one, knowing that you can be part of something that's never been done before. If that doesn't excite you, I think you're a dead man.
And he says the huge external expectations on the All Blacks will give them an edge in the land of the rising sun.
Well, it gives us an advantage in the fact that we've dealt with it before. I think it's not to say that other teams can't deal with it, but when you haven't had that experience, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, and if they don't deal with it, then it could affect their performance.
Only time will tell if Hansen and co have the right mix, but there's no doubt they're favourites to win what should be one of the most tightly contested World Cups in history. In Tamaki Makaurau, mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
And you can see Joe's story, which will go up on our Facebook page and online. It's about 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. OK, here's your chance. You want to be All Black selectors. Has Steve Hansen got it right? Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Who would have been in your selection and who's missed out that shouldn't have? The Waitangi Tribunal is slamming the Crown for letting our rivers and lakes get so polluted and for essentially blocking Māori from helping to fix the problem. It has just released a landmark report into national freshwater and geothermal resources. Now, that report highlights a raft of failures in the Resource Management Act. The Tribunal is calling for sweeping changes that include recognising Māori proprietary rights, allocating them fresh water and making councils work with hapu and iwi. Our Māori News correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin reports.
Across the nation, waterways like Lake Horopinua are in a degraded state. At the heart of the latest Waitangi Tribunal report is a clear failure of the Crown and the Resource Management Act to protect fresh water. It's also made a case to recognise Māori proprietary rights. The Māori Council boss, Matthew Tukaki, says Māori are kaitiaki and guardians of the waterways, and recognising their rights is a must.
We get a kai, we live, work and play in, on, around the water. And so that's protection has to come down to also a definition of proprietary rights. Who owns what, therefore who has responsibility of what, but also who has liability of that responsibility. So that's where we've gone with this.
The Māori Council made the original claim in 2012 that their rights were being disregarded. 7 years later, today, the Tribunal says numerous deficiencies in the RMA have put Māori on the back foot for decades. It says farmers have more rights to water allocation than Māori, and it's calling for a new allocation scheme for iwi, hapu and Māori landowners. Mr Tukaki says Māori have not been able to access water to start businesses such as kiwi fruit plantations or mussel farms.
Without the allocation, we're actually precluded from economic independence, and so we remain dependent, on the state for most of our income. So the economic side of things is pretty bad when it comes to allocation.
The report also highlights an unwillingness from councillors to work with iwi on freshwater management. Since 1991, no council has transferred powers to Māori, which they can do, and only 2 have voluntarily entered into joint management agreements. The Environment Minister David Parker says that's a complex issue and councils don't always know which Māori group to work with. He wouldn't say how he would tackle that, but did say that Māori had a fair point about water allocation.
Māori have rights and interests in water that are yet to be resolved. They feel locked out of water resources, which seems unfair to them in some areas. And we agree those issues need to be addressed.
The Tribunal says those rights can be met if the Crown sets up a national co-governance body for fresh water and change the law to force councils to work more closely with hapu and iwi in accordance with the Treaty of Waitangi. An original Tribunal claimant, Manu Paul, is all for it.
It's important because the treaty is a partnership. What is happening in the present is that the partnership is skewed so that we've got the missionary position with the Crown on top and Māori underneath. And that has to change. The partnership has to be recognised.
Water rights have long been a contentious issue in Aotearoa. The Tribunal and the Supreme Court say Māori have first rights to water, but that's never been properly dealt with by the government, whose position is that no one owns it. In today's report, the Tribunal suggests taking the case to the courts to determine whether native title in fresh water exists. Manu Paul says he's asked his lawyers to do just that.
We're saying quite clearly the water is like Māori land. It is a taonga under Article 2, and we have not had any legislation that has removed that from us, nor have we given it up.
David Parker says he accepts some of the report's criticisms, which will be dealt with in the RMA review. He says he will make a further announcement on fresh water next week. Mo te hōtaka o Te Ahi Pō, ko li Marama McLaughlin tēnei.
The Police Association is accusing the National Party of playing politics on gun law reform. President Chris Cahill says the opposition leader is wrong to say the gun buyback scheme has been a fiasco and is pleading for MPs to be better than America when it comes to pursuing gun law reform. But Simon Bridges insists his party is unlikely to support the second tranche of gun legislation because it's targeting law-abiding citizens and being soft on criminals, gangs and extremists. Our political reporter Joe Moyer has the story.
Chris Cahill hit back at National's claims that the gun buyback scheme is a fiasco, saying anyone who has been to a buyback event or talked to someone who took part would know the opposite to be true. He says not supporting the second tranche of legislation that would create a gun register and tighter firearms regulations is putting politics ahead of meaningful reform.
I would say this isn't the opportunity to play politics. It's way more important than that. Since 1997, when Justice Thorpe recommended law amendments around firearms in response to Aria Roberts, politics have been played. We've seen what happens in America when politics stop meaningful reform. New Zealand needs to be better than that.
Simon Bridges won't completely rule out the National Party voting against the legislation due to be introduced later next month.
No, I'm not confirming that. It seems to me that's the likely position at this stage.
So is he just playing politics?
No, I'm not making this political. It's not about the police association. It's about a situation where National supported the first law. That was the right thing to do. The buyback scheme, however, is a fiasco. And we look at this new law and it seems like it's aimed at law-abiding New Zealanders. It's not aimed at the gangs, the crims and the extremists where it should be.
Mr Bridges says his issue is who the government is targeting, or in this case, not targeting, when it comes to stricter regulations. If that changes, he could be swayed to support the bill.
If the government shows, for example, with firearm protection orders, some of the things we've urged them to do, that this isn't about law-abiding New Zealanders, actually also about getting at gangs, criminals, extremists who have guns. In the case of gangs in their tens of thousands, then we'll have a serious relook at that. But it seems to me it's not about that.
But Mr Cahill says if legal firearms aren't put in greater lockdown, then criminals will simply get hold of them.
If you don't have the appropriate laws around firearms security, ownership, then you're making it really easy for criminals to get their hands on firearms. Because we know the majority of criminals get their firearms from stealing them from licensed firearms owners.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern wanted consensus on reforms, like she got when the government, with the support of National, pushed through legislation banning some firearms in the immediate aftermath of the Christchurch massacre that killed 51 people.
My hope would be that all political parties focus on people and focus on their safety in the same way that the New Zealand Police have said they absolutely support what we're doing to modernise our gun laws. I'd like to think that political parties would do the same.
The ACT leader David Seymour, who was the only MP who voted against the first tranche of legislation, also wants to see gangs and criminals punished, not law-abiding gun owners.
Only 1% of firearm crime is committed by people who had a licence. So the logic of the government's laws is to crack down on the 1% while doing nothing about the 99%.
Jacinda Ardern says the legislation is designed to stop gang members being able to access guns, while making sure fit and proper people are still able to. She says crimes are committed as a result of lax gun laws, and New Zealand learnt that the hard way. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
Let us know what you think about that. Has the government got the second round of gun law reform right or not? National says the goodies are being turned into baddies. Are they right? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National. Convicted double murderer Mark Lundy's appeal wraps up. We talk to NZQA about the now defunct Kite Business College. And should New Zealand history be a must in our schools? Oh, and we've got a story about a baby elephant ban. I put a shout out for you to let me know what you thought of the All Black selection. Already we're getting feedback. Gary from Otaki says Lomape, well, he thinks he was shortchanged. They say he's too much like Williams, says Gary, but he's so dangerous close to the line. And Grant from Waitangi's been in touch. Sonny Bill Williams is seriously overrated, he says. Lomape better at busting the line. When was the last time we saw SBW breaking up field like a nonu? Never, he says. So, if you want to have your say on that team, text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Let's go now to the headlines with Susanna.
An 8-month investigation into money laundering has led to a police swoop on several expensive Auckland houses and the arrest of 6 people. After searching a number of high-end properties, the police have taken control of $9 million worth of houses and cars, including a $280,000 Bentley. 3 men and 3 women have been charged with dozens of counts of money laundering, and police believe the cash came from drug dealing and other sources. A former trustee who admitted draining the bank account of a Far North Māori trust has been jailed for more than 5 years. Stephen James Henare was a trustee of the Parengarenga 3G Trust when he and his sister stole more than $1 million intended for forest management and gambled most of it away. Forest and Bird says the government's decision to stop a West Coast hydroelectric power scheme is a win for conservation, kayakers and future generations. West Power has been denied permission to build and operate the scheme on the Waitangi River. Forest and Bird says one of the country's most outstanding scenic rivers is now protected for future generations. But the Mayor of Westland says it will leave the coast vulnerable and isolated when it's cut off from the rest of the country by the Alpine Fault. The opposition leader says the National Party is unlikely to support the second tranche of gun legislation because it's targeting law-abiding citizens and being soft on criminals, gangs and extremists. Simon Bridges says the government needs to change its focus to criminals and gangs before his party could be swayed to vote in favour of it. The Police Association supports the legislation and is calling on Mr Bridges not to play politics. Virgin Australia has announced it will cut 750 jobs as the airline attempts to recover from a financial loss of close to $350 million. The airline says it is also reviewing the composition of its fleet and the routes it flies. It's also reducing the number of seats available to match weakening demand. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go now to business news with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. Port of Tauranga, so strong results for them.
Very strong result for them. They made a net profit of just over $100 million, which is a pretty good profit, and it's better than last year, which was $94 million, and it was also at the top of their guidance. And just a bit of icing on the cake for them, the S&P ratings agency lifted their rating as a result of their very strong performance. The company's done very well since they dredged their harbour, and now they're receiving those very large ships, making it one of the busiest ports in the country. And they've also done a lot to have connections to inland routes. So they've got train travel now between, say, Hamilton, Hub, and so forth. So they've come a long way, and they have a very positive outlook. So, yeah, good result for them. And the market like that, they rose more than 2%. That was 13 cents up to $6.25.
And other good news today, one would argue, for the healthcare and appliance manufacturer, Fisher & Paykel. So they are, well, now projecting a better outlook, aren't they?
Yeah, well, they had their annual meeting today, and they gave a guidance update to their shareholders, who were pretty pleased with it. Their share price rose, just a bit over 6% late this afternoon as a result of that upgrade. So what's the reason behind that? Their hospital business is doing better in the first quarter. So they have a year end in March. So they're a little different from some of the companies we've been reporting on, say, for Tauranga, for example, which is June. So this was, for their first half, they're expecting an upgrade on their profit outlook. And that's because of the kiwi, the drop in the value of the kiwi. So it's dropped about 5% this year, and that's about how much more the company is expecting to make as a result of that. And now their guidance assumes that the kiwi stays around 64 cents. And what they're expecting is to make between 245 and 255 million in the full year. They're going to be up with their first half coming up at the end of September is their first half. They're expecting to make 120 million there, so pretty good profit for them, and some upside as well. So the market really like that upgrade for sure.
So unlike holidaymakers, they are hoping that
yeah. Well, if you're going on a holiday, unless you're going to Queenstown, I suppose you probably
they like a weaker dollar.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so our index rose more. Now that's the NZX Top 50 index. It rose more than 1% today. Now that's the seventh time this month that we've had a movement of 1%. And that's becoming like the new normal with so much volatility in the market. So we were up 113 points to 10,626. And our Kiwi is trading at 63.3 US cents, 94 Australian and 51.6 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Palcier with our business update. Foreign students of a failed business school are still in the dark over who will mark their final assessments and give them their diplomas. The Kiwi Institute of Training and Education, or KITE, is one of at least 6 private training establishments to be deregistered by NZQA in the last 2 years. Now, last week, students were locked out of the building with staff not responding to calls or emails as KITE went into liquidation. NZQA took action against KITE last year for substandard marking, but gave it the green light again before this year's financial failure. It says a third party will now mark the final assessments, and those who fail will have to move on to yet another institute. But it's not clear who the third party is, who will award the diplomas, and when. Meanwhile, the students say they are out of pocket and were told in a meeting on Monday by Immigration New Zealand that they must pay $310 for a visa extension if they want to stay in the country. I spoke to NZQA Deputy Chief Executive Quality Assurance, Eve McMahon, who explained that students will be reimbursed if they are out of pocket.
In New Zealand, we have an export education levy, which can be used to both reimburse students for their fees, but also some other costs that relate to sorting out their situations in this instance.
So it's unlikely that they'll have to pay again. They'll get their assessment, they'll know where they stand, and they won't have to pay again at this point.
That's correct.
Okay. I noticed in some of the material that you've given to the students, you've said, NZQA has said, there will be some gaps in this process. What does that mean?
Could you please clarify that? I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
In the handout given to the students that explained that their assignments had been collected by NZQA, the flyer given to the students states that there will be some gaps in the process. So I'm wondering what that means.
The only kind of gaps I could imagine that it will take time to complete the marking, and that we need to have all of the assessments available to us to be marked.
Do you have all the assessments as far as you know?
To the best of my knowledge, we do.
And how long do you think this process is going to take?
I'm not able to give you a clear time frame on the time it will take. That will depend on the organisation that is completing the work for the KITE students, but it is underway.
And who
we could endeavour to find out how long that is likely to take and come back to you.
Obviously, it's a very
Yes, we do understand it's a very difficult time for students, and we are providing as much information as we can as quickly as possible.
So who is the third party who is marking these assessments?
I'm not able to divulge that information.
Why not?
There is a contractual relationship, and it hasn't been discussed with them.
As in, you have not had a discussion with them?
This organisation was originally contracted by Kite to complete the verification of the marking. The relationship was between Kite and that organisation.
Surely the students have a right to know who is deciding their fates, in essence. Do they have the right to that information?
Whether the students have the right to know who is doing the work on their behalf.
Yeah, who is marking their assessments?
It's commercially in confidence, so we don't give that information out here.
When did you first know that there was an issue with Kite?
We first identified issues during 2018 when we undertook some monitoring of their business programs.
What issues?
There are issues with their assessment practices in the Level 5 and 6 business programs.
So what did you find that concerned you?
We were concerned that the assessments were not being marked to the level and quality that they should have been.
Okay, so what did you do with the consequence of that?
So we issued a statutory condition against Kite in October of last year, and then we worked with Kite to improve their assessment practices in order for the students to work with the students enrolled at the time so that they could complete.
Students are asking, you are quality control for these organisations, whether you are doing enough quality control. Are you?
So NZQA has New Zealand has a strong reputation for delivering quality education, protecting the interests of New Zealand and international students.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms McMahon. Were you just shuffling through to find the relevant section in your answers page there?
I don't think that's a relevant question to be asking.
I do. Were you just shuffling through some pre-prepared answers there to find the relevant answer to the question I just asked you?
No.
This has been going on for some time with these schools, these PTEs. How many others are substandard or about to, fall off the edge?
There is a very small proportion of education organisations in New Zealand with which we are concerned.
How big is small? Can you give us a number?
No, I can't give you a number at this moment.
Why not?
I don't have it on the top of my head.
Right, so it's not that you won't give it to us, you just don't know what that number is right now?
I don't know what the number is right now, no.
Okay. So is it time to do something more about this? An overall general audit, a shutdown, or something else? If there is a group of them there that you have concerns about, and we know, track record-wise, a number of these organisations have gone out of business or gone bust. If you want to maintain the reputation of New Zealand, what more do you need to do in terms of policing these organisations?
So our role is to ensure that quality education is delivered to students. We quality assure systems and processes that providers have in place to be confident that they can deliver a good quality education to students. We monitor, and part of our quality assurance processes is to identify when there are concerns, and when we do that, we work with providers to improve their practices where we can.
So, is there any room for improvement at your end?
I'm sure there's always room for improvement with quality assurance.
And that's Eve McMahon from NZQA. The mother of a Mangawhai toddler at the centre of a murder trial has described finding her baby girl limp and unconscious. Aaron Archer is on trial in the High Court in Auckland, accused of murdering his partner's daughter, 2-year-old Aria Roberts, in her home in August last year. This morning, her mother took to the stand to tell her version of what happened the night the girl died. Here's our court reporter, Annika Smith.
Aria's mother told the court the 22nd of August last year started out like any normal day. It was a Wednesday and she'd kept her toddler home from playgroup after the girl threw up her breakfast. In the early evening, the woman, who has name suppression, popped to the local shop to get spinach for a salad she was going to make for dinner. She left her phone in the car and returned 5 minutes later.
I saw I had a missed call from Aaron. I called him back. He answered saying that Aria wasn't breathing, and I just screamed, like, what? Like, what do you mean? There was one point where he must have put the phone down and it stayed on speaker. So I was just screaming at the phone on speaker to say, like, call an ambulance, get my neighbours.
She said Aaron Archer ran out onto the deck when she got home.
I was just screaming in the house, like, where is she? And so I found her in my bedroom. She was covered with a dressing gown and she was just very pale. I picked her up, and then I realised that she was very limp.
The woman screamed for her neighbours, who came running to help with CPR before leaving the house in a distressed state. The jury has already heard Aria died of an unsurvivable brain injury. Her mother cried in court today as she described realising the toddler was dead when she saw emergency personnel lowering the curtains in her home. It's the Crown's case that Mr Archer assaulted Aria that evening. This morning, jurors were shown post-mortem photographs which showed she had more than 20 bruises, most of them on different parts of her head. Dr Rexon C, who conducted the post-mortem, told the jury a single knock to the head may explain 1 or 2 bruises, but not 20.
These are not normally seen in children of toddler age, of normal daily knocks and bumps. These are classical features of abusive head trauma. Therefore, it is very, very, very unlikely this is from an accident.
Later, under cross-examination, the pathologist conceded the worst 2 bruises could be explained by a child being swung by their feet, slipping and hitting their head. But he took issue with defence lawyer Ron Mansfield's suggestion the remaining bruises could be explained by Aria being handled by emergency staff.
There are bruises that can be possibly explained by resuscitation or by hitting a wall and falling on the ground, but there are quite a few bruises that's unexplained.
The jury has heard another expert, whom the defence will call later this week, has found Aaron Archer's explanation of what happened that night does correlate with Aria's injuries. Mr Mansfield put this to Mr C.
Do you think, Doctor, you've been too keen to find that the injuries are non-accidental?
Unless I've been provided a plausible scenario that can explain the bruises, I think I would accept it, but I have not been provided any acceptable reasons. Resuscitation can explain some, bumping can explain some, but there are some concerning ones.
At the time of her death, Mr Archer told witnesses he was swinging Aria around when she hit her head. Today, her mother said he'd told her the same story, going on to say she'd seen him throwing the girl in the air while playing before. Last week, the jury heard Aria isn't the first child her mother has lost. She had a twin who died in childbirth, but Aria was a healthy young girl despite being born 10 weeks premature. Her mother said she'd never leave her daughter with anyone she didn't completely trust.
I wouldn't have hit someone in the house that was going to be dangerous. I just always had her safety. She was like my miracle child, so I was very protective of her.
The trial before Justice Fata and a jury continues. Ātui te ko ti matua ko Annika Smith aho.
An Auckland fast food restaurant worker says it's intolerable they were asked to effectively continue working after clocking out. The employee at Burger King Queen Street says a manager called on them to follow suit when another staffer stayed at work after their shift was over. But the fast food giant says some correspondence has been taken out of context and Burger King doesn't ask people to work without pay. Chen Liu reports.
A screenshot shows the message was sent in an WhatsApp group chat named Burger King Queen Street Manager Group last week. It appears to say a staffer stayed after clocking out, and to quote, "If she can do it, we can do that as well." A worker at the store, who didn't want to be identified, says she believes the manager who sent the message was encouraging everyone to work for free after their rostered shift finished. We have voiced her words.
The screenshot ended up saying, if this person can clock out and then continue doing work, you should do it as well. And I found that very discouraging. It's saying like, hey, clock out, finish work for free. No, that's not us.
She says she contacted the Unite Union.
I will get paid for whatever amount of work I do. If they're expecting me to work for free, sorry, I'm not going to do that. I will just finish my shift and leave.
The worker says she flagged it with the store management when it happened last week, emailing a screenshot to her area manager, her restaurant manager and the union. And she says she was removed from the group chat shortly after she complained and believes the group has been disbanded. Mike Train from the United Union says they have had a collective agreement with Burger King for more than a decade.
That's not an acceptable request. That's an unlawful request because it's asking people to clock out and continue working. This is a constant problem we've had with fast food companies over the years.
Employment lawyer Peter Cullen says an employer can ask staff to continue working by mutual agreement. He says there is no problem if the staff are still being paid, and they can still choose whether to do it or not.
If, on the other hand, the employer wants people to work for nothing after they've clocked off, that's clearly illegal. They can take a personal grievance and claim the lost wages.
Burger King in a statement says it conducted an internal investigation. It says the company is confident it has not asked the staff to work without pay, and there was a miscommunication, with the restaurant manager sending an email to, quote, motivate staff that was taken out of context. And Burger King says the management team have been given a refresher on staffing policy. Mo te hotaka o te ahi nei, ko Chen Liu te nei.
Brazil says it's now ready to accept foreign aid from G7 nations to help fight fires in the Amazon, but only if it can determine how the funds are spent. The comments are an apparent attempt to smooth over a public spat between the Brazilian and French presidents, and come after governors of states in the Brazilian Amazon told President Jair Bolsonaro they desperately need the money to help fight the record wildfires. Brazil's president had earlier unleashed a tirade of insults against the French President Emmanuel Macron in a continuing dispute over the fires. But as the BBC's Sophie Long reports from Altamira in northern Brazil, the diplomatic standoff does nothing to help those on the ground.
The heart of the Amazon, the world's lungs on fire. A chorus of condemnation echoed around the world, and this ecological disaster became a global political issue. Brazil's president didn't strike the match that lit these flames, but many say, given his policies and his response to the crisis, he might as well have. We're just passing over an area of rainforest that is still burning. My guide tells me it's farmland, but it's very close to indigenous land, home to a huge amount of wildlife, and also a tribe of people that has almost no contact with the outside world. It means they also have almost no means by which to put out the fires that are raging towards them. The fate of many Amazonian people now lies in the government's hands. So what is the greatest threat to the land where your community live? In the forest on the banks of the Xingu River, Kumaripa Shapaya tells me it's Brazil's leaders.
One of the biggest threats my people face today is our government. They are trying to destroy the Amazon, to exterminate our people. They are the people trying to destroy our country and the Amazon.
But President Bolsonaro seems more concerned with Brazil's sovereignty. He's accused the French president of treating Brazil like a colony. Some blame for the blazes has been directed at farmers who want to raise the forest for their crops and cattle. But Adelardo Corva and his daughter, who've worked the land here for more than 3 decades, tell me farmers are not to blame, and nor is their president.
It's people acting illegally who want to claim the forest. Farmers who own registered land don't burn and they don't deforest.
We have to leave promptly. The community here are angry about the way their country and their president are being portrayed. A group of indigenous leaders say the fires are just one of many threats to the Amazon. One spoke anonymously because he fears for his life. He says his community have been threatened. If they don't leave their land by Wednesday, they'll be killed. While miners and loggers continue to encroach on the scorched earth of the Amazon, President Bolsonaro says he will re-evaluate the laws surrounding indigenous lands in order to increase productivity. Meanwhile, the largest rainforest on the planet continues to smoulder.
Sophie Long reporting there. It is about 6 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Supreme Court has reserved its decision after hearing both sides in Mark Lundy's last chance appeal to clear his name. Lundy was convicted of murdering his wife Christine and daughter Amber in 2002, again at a retrial in 2015, and the convictions were upheld by the Court of Appeal last year. His lawyer finished proceedings today by asking the court to give Lundy a new trial, free from tainted evidence. Emma Hatton reports.
Lundy's lawyer, Jonathan Eaton QC, argued his entire second trial had been shaped by inadmissible evidence and urged the Supreme Court to give Lundy another go.
All Mr. Lundy says is, after 19 years, can I not have a trial where I'm not being confronted with the Crown putting before a jury unreliable expert opinion?
That unreliable expert opinion is the evidence, known as mRNA, that was allowed at the retrial but was later found inadmissible by the Court of Appeal. The mRNA evidence allowed the Crown to say that the brain or spinal tissue found on the shirt Lundy was wearing on the night of attacks was more likely to be from a human than an animal. The tissue, referred to as central nervous system or CNS tissue, the mRNA evidence, plus Christine Lundy's DNA on the shirt, gave the Crown a persuasive argument during the retrial that Lundy was responsible for the killings. But the lawyer for the Crown, Philip Morgan QC, told the court even without the mRNA evidence, the Crown still had a strong case.
This was central nervous system tissue and nothing else. The DNA of Christine Lundy is extracted from it and no one else. Recognising that it was the shirt that the appellant himself admitted wearing on the night of the killings simply led to, and indeed this is the finding of the Court of Appeal, the inescapable conclusion that the appellant was responsible for the killings.
But Mr Eaton argued that it was the mRNA evidence that had been the cornerstone of the Crown's case at trial because it provided the game-over link that the tissue was indeed from a human. He said when the mRNA was ruled out, the DNA and the CNS alone didn't prove anything.
The experts said, well, the science doesn't let you draw that conclusion. The experts said, and they were both questioned extensively about it, there are other possibilities that would factor against that.
Yesterday, the Crown lawyer downplayed the importance of the mRNA during the trial, saying its submissions had mostly focused on the DNA and CNS evidence. But Mr Eaton disagreed and said the Crown had fought hard to get the mRNA evidence admitted in a pre-trial hearing. He said the whole legal process had been undermined by the back and forth of whether the mRNA evidence was legitimate or not.
When you have a Court of Appeal saying pre-trial, it is highly relevant, it is critical to the Crown case, it has potentially high prejudice to a defendant, but it's not unfair prejudice. And then you have the same court saying it was unfairly prejudicial, it should not have been before the jury, but it wasn't of a degree of significance that his trial wasn't fair.
Mr Morgan also argued aside from the DNA and CNS evidence, other circumstantial evidence, such as the blue and orange paint that Lundy was known to mark his tools with being found at the murder scene, the life insurance policy held for Christine Lundy, and the concession that the killer was someone the victims knew, meant the Court of Appeal had acted correctly in applying the proviso and keeping Lundy's convictions. But Mr Eaton said the circumstantial evidence had a lot of question marks around it too, and the only way to address these would be in a fresh trial. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
We're hearing a lot about the merits of eating insects at the moment, but what about feeding them to your pets? Pet owners in the UK are being urged by vets to give their cats and dogs a diet that is rich in insects. The British Veterinary Association says insect-based food reduces the impact of livestock on the planet and the climate. It's estimated that pets consume about a fifth of the world's meat and fish. The BBC's Roger Harrabin has more.
Insect farms are already producing edible larvae to feed fish, pigs and chickens. There's now a growing market for pet food based on grubs. Amongst its supporters are vegetarians who say it allows dogs and cats to eat the animal protein they need without having to kill livestock. This is particularly important for cats, which require an amino acid, taurine, which is only naturally available in meat, fish and insects. Simon Doherty, president of the BVA, said feeding pets with insect protein could relieve some of the pressure on land, water and the climate caused by the global livestock industry.
There's a fantastic opportunity here to look at insects as providing an alternative source of some of the nutrient ingredients that we use in our pet food diets.
Most British dog food is made from offal that people don't want to eat. So switching that for insects would allow British offal to be exported to people who do want to eat it.
And that was Roger Harrabin with that report. In news just to hand, the Auckland Regional Public Health Service has confirmed there are 10 cases of measles at Manurewa High School in Auckland. The Medical Officer of Health, Dr. William Ranger, says the service is supporting the school to stop the spread of the virus. It is providing advice on who needs to be in quarantine because they may have been exposed to measles and are not immune. A student or staff member with measles can easily infect others in a secondary school where students move around to different classes, and there are also cultural and sports teams. We will try to bring you more on this story after 6, and we'll also get to that feedback that's flooding in about gun law reform.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. An 8-month investigation into money laundering has led to a police swoop on several expensive Auckland houses and the arrest of 6 people. After searching properties in Remuera, East Tāmaki Heights, Papatoetoe and Karaka today, the police took control of $9 million worth of houses and cars, including a $280,000 Bentley. About $1 million in cash and bank accounts has also been frozen. Detective Senior Sergeant Wayne Gray told Checkpoint the 3 men and 3 women arrested are part of a group that specialises in cleaning dirty money.
We've been targeting a group that have been moving money for organised criminal groups, and they are professional third-party people who are assisting these groups to make their money look legitimate.
Wayne Gray says the money originally came from a number of sources, including drug dealing. The government has updated the number of cases of measles so far this year to 849. The Associate Health Minister Julianne Genter says more than 100 of those have been notified in the past week, mostly in the Auckland region. She says extra nurse vaccinators will be employed.
We want to reduce the barriers to people getting vaccinated. That means having vaccinations available at the hospital, doctor's office, but also community places like churches and malls. And the increase in the number of nurse vaccinators will be in the order of 5.
Julianne Genter. Meanwhile, Bay of Plenty health authorities are warning locals to get vaccinated against measles if they're travelling to Auckland. Toi Te Ora Public Health says immunisation uptake in the region is not currently high enough to prevent a local outbreak. The government has said no to a hydroelectric power scheme proposed for the West Coast. West Power had applied for concessions to build and operate the scheme on the Waitangi River between Hokitika and Franz Josef. The final decision rested with the Environment Minister David Parker, who says accepting the scheme would have been inconsistent with conservation of a near-pristine wilderness area. He says he is confident he made the correct decision after reviewing public submissions and expert advice.
I've released also some photographs of the Morgan Gorge, which is an absolutely outstanding natural feature that I think most New Zealanders will see and think, wow, I don't want the natural flow modified in that gorge.
The Environment Minister David Parker. The Prime Minister says crimes happen as a result of relaxed gun laws, a lesson New Zealand learnt the hard way in Christchurch 5 months ago. The government, with the support of National, pushed through the first tranche of legislation banning some firearms in the immediate aftermath of the mosque massacre. Now National is indicating it may vote against the second tranche, creating a gun register and stricter controls. And Jacinda Ardern says she hopes it doesn't.
My hope would be that all political parties focus on people and focus on their safety in the same way that the New Zealand Police have said they absolutely support what we're doing to modernise our gun laws. I'd like to think that political parties would do the same.
National's leader Simon Bridges says the legislation targets law-abiding citizens while being soft on criminals, gangs and extremists. The Education Minister is keeping tight-lipped on the future of the history curriculum. History teachers have today implored the Education and Workforce Select Committee to make the teaching of New Zealand history compulsory in schools. Chris Hipkins says the government is looking into the current curriculum and civics education.
The work we're doing around civics education is part of the School Leavers Toolkit,
the work that we're doing around New Zealand history in schools is a little different to that, and we will have more to say on the New Zealand history in schools thing soon, and we'll have more to say on the school leavers toolkit soon, but just not right now.
Chris Hipkin says some schools are doing a fantastic job of teaching history, but there's still some way to go. Virgin Australia has announced it will cut 750 jobs as it tries to recover from a massive financial loss. The airline says it is also reviewing the composition of its fleet and the routes it flies. The ABC's Stephanie Chalmers reports.
Virgin Australia boss Paul Scurrett delivered his first results since taking up the role in March, unveiling a $349 million loss.
Today we've announced a set of results that are disappointing for the group, and there's definitely work we need to do to improve.
That work includes slashing 750 head office and corporate roles and merging the back office functions of its domestic, regional and Tiger Air operations. The airline is reviewing its capacity and expects to reduce the number of seats available to match weaker demand.
Stephanie Chalmers in Sydney. Port Taranaki is dealing with more than 1,000 litres of firefighting foam concentrate that contains a chemical banned 13 years ago. Most of it is in a tank on board a tug. The port's chief executive, Guy Roper, says none of it has ever been used and they're working with the Environmental Protection Authority to safely dispose of it all. The port is one of at least 8 sites in Taranaki where PFOS foam was stored or used for years, despite the ban, and in some cases it has contaminated groundwater and streams. A bill allowing bars and clubs to stay open outside normal licensing hours during the Rugby World Cup has passed its third reading, but without the Greens' support. The legislation went through all stages in Parliament this afternoon in a fiery and colourful debate. The bill, which mirrors legislation introduced before the 2015 Rugby World Cup, allows licensed premises to stay open and serve alcohol as they televise the matches. But Green MP Jan Logie said her party couldn't support a bill that links New Zealand's national game with alcohol.
If we think about that in the place that we've given this game in our culture, and for us to spend time in this house ahead of other things for the purpose of ensuring that people following our national game are able to have a drink.
The Green MP, Jan Logie. It's 6 minutes past 6. Long-time Crusader Ryan Crotty has won the midfield battle, edging out Hurricanes counterpart Ngani Laumape for a place in the All Blacks Rugby World Cup squad. Laumape, veteran prop Owen Franks and loose forward Liam Squire are the notable omissions from the 31-man group. Coach Steve Hansen says Laumape can consider himself unlucky.
It's one of those positions where 5 doesn't fit 4, and whoever we left out was going to be disappointed and probably deserved to be in the team. In the case of Ryan, he's got a lot of experience, been with the All Blacks, he's in the team leader group, can play both second 5 and centre, and those little things probably edged him ahead of Nance.
Steve Hansen. Teen sensation Coco Gauff has lived up to the hype surrounding her US Tennis Open debut. The 15-year-old American has come back from a set-down to beat Russian Anastasia Potapova in the first round. Gauff says it was a very different experience to Wimbledon and it took a while for her nerves to settle.
This is my first main draw US Open. I'm playing on Louis Armstrong, the second biggest court. So after the first set, I was like, I kind of have to reset and just stop thinking about what will happen after the match and just think about what I need to do to win the second set.
The United States Women's Football International Carly Lloyd has been asked by an NFL team to kick in their final pre-season game. She was invited to an NFL training session last week and a clip of her kicking a 50-metre field goal went viral. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Simon Morris is on the trail of a good movie, or 3. I'm back on the plastic trail with the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, Juliette Gerard, asking how much microplastic is too much, and there's a sofa session with Bryn Van Vliet.
Don't be like the rest of them, darling.
That's Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel. Long fine spells and a few showers. Waitangi to Kapiti, including central high country. The odd shower from Manawatu northwards tonight. Showers becoming more extensive tomorrow. For Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, mainly fine weather. Isolated showers about Bay of Plenty tomorrow and about Wellington and South Wairarapa tomorrow night. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine tonight. Tomorrow afternoon and evening, brief rain or showers, spreading north with a southerly change. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow with brief heavy falls. Early morning thunderstorms are possible in Fiordland. Otago and Southland, mainly fine tonight. A period of rain tomorrow morning, snow above 500 metres, then mostly clearing, but further showers about Clutha and coastal Southland. Chatham Islands mainly fine, showers late tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:09.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A Northland man who admitted draining the bank account of a Far North Māori trust to fund a lavish lifestyle has been jailed for more than 5 years. Stephen James Henare was a trustee of the Paringaringa 3G Trust when he and his sister stole almost $1.1 million intended for forest management. Henare pleaded guilty days into his trial in May, admitting 5 charges of theft by a person in a special relationship and 1 charge of attempting to pervert the course of justice. He was sentenced at the High Court in Auckland today. Katie Doyle reports.
The trust, known as P3G, manages a 512-hectare forestry block of Māori land in the Taitokoro district. In June 2012, Stephen Henare and his sister Margaret Dixon were appointed trustees, and less than a year later the trust's bank account had been emptied. Its treasurer, Arjun Ahoy, told the court they were left on the edge of a cliff with no money and $100,000 of debt.
We've had over 10 years of this. It's been very hard on the whānau. A lot of our old people have passed who were at the beginning of this. We've been abused along the way by our former trustees. So we've been treated horrendously.
He said the forest was worth $20 million, but with the costs of selling almost a quarter of the tree cutting rights, as well as maintenance, replanting and harvesting costs, there would be little to nothing left to be put back into the community. Proceedings began this morning, with Henare's lawyer, Jeremy Bioletti, asking for the matter to be put off so he could apply for restorative justice. He says Henare's daughter had raised concerns about her father's place at the marae when he dies, and urged the judge to help facilitate a meeting to help Henare reconnect with whānau and make amends.
What I would be proposing is a marae-based meeting where they are invited to attend, where anyone who wants to attend can attend, and that process would involve, regardless of who attended, would involve Mr Henare acknowledging the situation in front of the taumata present.
However, his application was denied, with Arjun Ahoy saying the trust would not accept any invitation to meet with Mr Henare. When asked if Henare's body would ever be welcomed back to his community's marae, Mr Ahoy said no, take him somewhere else. At sentencing, Justice Muir said Henare's offending had a high level of planning that had only stopped when the cupboard was bare.
He abused his responsibilities as trustee to fund his own lavish lifestyle, while those he was called to serve suffered and continue to do so.
Justice Muir said Henare had used some of the money to fund a corporate box at the Warriors and his gambling addiction, which led to him being barred from the Auckland casino. He sentenced Henare to 5 years and 2 months imprisonment. His sister, Margaret Dixon, has already been sentenced to 12 months home detention and ordered to pay $5,000 in reparation. In Auckland, for Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
And we will update you on the story about the measles outbreak, it seems, at Manurewa High School. So, the school posted to their Facebook page about 20 minutes ago the following. It says that they have had 13 cases to date of students who have had the measles, and cases are increasing every day. This has resulted in 300 students being sent home, some staff being tested for immunity against measles, school and community activities being postponed. Therefore, the Board of Trustees trustees have decided for health and safety reasons that all students must provide proof of their MMR immunisation status. It goes on to say, if you have been immunised, please bring proof of your immunisation, i.e. your Plunkett book or records from your doctor. Go to your normal Period 1 class and your teacher will take a copy of your records. If you have not been immunised, please do not return to school until Monday, 2nd September. And it says you must contact the school, school attendants as normal to inform us that you are not coming, and the reason is that you are not immunised. You will be recorded as not immunised, the school says, and if there are any further confirmed cases, there is a possibility that you could be sent home for up to 2 weeks. The school says it is currently working with County's Manukau Health Services, who will be offering immunisations at school over the next 2 weeks. So that is an update on the measles situation at Manurewa High School. The school itself saying that to date, 13 cases of measles, and it's asking some students to provide proof that they have been immunised before returning to school. A second wave of gun laws is making baddies out of the good guys, according to the National Party, and it says it's unlikely to support the legislation after seeing a draft copy that it claims was leaked to it. The next round of reforms would see a gun register established, fines for some gun offences jumping from $1,000 to $10,000, and it would also require gun clubs to be certified and registered every 5 years. And National says doctors would be forced to pass on medical information if it indicated someone was unfit to hold a firearms licence. The party's police spokesperson, Brett Hudson, says the reforms will drive mental health problems underground.
From what I can see, the provisions they've put into the draft legislation come either mirror or come from the Civil Aviation Act. Provisions that apply there to maybe 4,500 people, and they want to layer those onto 250,000 Kiwis. If that's the case, if you've got good people who are worried that if they go to a doctor because the circumstances in their life have changed, maybe they've got some issues to deal with, and if they're worried that that might result in an officer turning up on their doorstep to talk to them about their firearms, well, the most likely outcome there is they simply won't go. It's a well-intentioned policy idea, but it has unintended consequences. This is why we should be taking the time to review this legislation and policy properly.
So your leader, Simon Bridges, has said that Labor hasn't heeded our warnings publicly and privately. Tell us about this. What conversations were you having?
Well, we've said all along that they should be focused on criminal activity. We've said all along, even in the first round of reforms, which we supported, we said that they should be focused on criminal activity and gangs.
So you had some private conversations with them as well? Were you involved in those?
Well, I've certainly had a conversation with the Minister on a range of topics, and both the gun buyback and the second round of reforms came into that. But I haven't been briefed on those reforms. The only detail I've received is through a leaked copy of legislation. And that's disappointing, quite frankly. If the government wanted us on side, if they wanted us some consensus to reign on this matter, surely they would have come to us and given us a full briefing.
Are you being lobbied quite hard from gun owners and constituents?
Oh, I get a lot of communications, but I wouldn't say I'm being lobbied quite hard by any particular group or individuals. But
what are they saying to you?
Myself to meet with a number of them. Sorry.
What are they saying to you? The people who are talking to you about this?
I get a range of comments, but they range from everyone thinking that it was that it was just wrong for any reform to happen, to people that were just deeply upset that it all happened so quickly. And that it appeared that the government, and in fairness, Parliament, wasn't listening to them. I'm certainly making the effort to listen to them. I certainly don't pledge any particular reforms or any particular changes to anyone, but I am making myself available to anyone on either side, if you want to call it side, either part of the argument around firearms reform. Unlike the Minister, I've met with firearms groups and Gun Control New Zealand.
Do you know of anyone who hasn't handed in their firearms, who have weapons that are now considered illegal?
I don't know people firsthand, but the numbers clearly show that that is the case. The police advised the government in April that there could be 240,000 or even more now prohibited firearms in New Zealand. In order for those to be all captured or all handed in, it would require an average of 1,000 firearms handed in at each event, and at the moment they're running at under 120.
So are you saying that in areas where they've had buyback events, that there are people there who are hoarding these weapons and not returning them?
I can't know where people are or if they are hoarding them, but I can tell you that if the police advise there could be 240,000 or more of these things, that's an average, and admittedly it's a mathematical average, but a mathematical average of 1,000 per event, and at the moment they're running at under 120. That requires an enormous uptick in the remaining sort of 130-odd events that there are.
So doesn't that just tell us your so-called good guys are actually, well, they're baddies too?
Well, if it tells us anything, it tells us the government got the buyback wrong. They gave experts about 5 hours to advise on the buyback scheme, and the KPMG report shows us that those experts advised just a flat retail price, no discount for age or condition. The government chose to ignore that. It put pinching pennies ahead of public safety, and I'd look at the numbers that are coming in right now, and that lies at their doorstep. We have said all along that they should be paying a fair and reasonable retail value. They chose to go with a different scheme than was effectively recommended.
But it's the law now, so those people who are not turning their weapons over, they're breaking the law. And these are the people you say don't need to be governed by tighter laws.
Well, if there are people that are choosing not to hand in their weapons, or firearms, if they're choosing not to hand in their firearms at the end of the buyback period, then they will be deemed criminals. Now, people in the public will have their own view on how genuine that criminality is.
What's your view?
My point is that...
No, what's your view on their level of criminality? Should they not hand these weapons in by the end of the buyback? What is your view on their criminality?
My view is the government should have got the buyback right in the first place, and they've still got time to change it. So if they don't...
That sounds like you're supporting people who are breaking the law, are you?
I'm supporting the government to offer a fair and reasonable price to firearms owners so that they will be incentivised to hand these things in. That is the law. We all want the law to be complied with. If the government thinks it can simply do it with a big stick, then they may be disappointed, as we may all be disappointed with the final outcome. But they've got an opportunity still to put that right. We've said all along, and on multiple occasions, that they should be offering a proper compensation to incentivise the return or handover of these firearms, and they've still got time.
And that's Nationals Police spokesperson Brett Hudson. We're getting a bit of feedback on this, so we can get to some of it now. Simon Bridges using the deaths of people to get votes from the gun lobby. Shame on him, this person says. The gun reforms are aimed at getting rid of semi-automatic guns, which no one needs, and registering all guns. It's not aimed at the law-abiding or the criminals. It was one of his law-abiding registered gun owners who allegedly used a semi-automatic gun on his innocent fellow law-abiding citizens. John says, I'm a licensed firearm owner and I support the increased controls on firearms and the register of firearms. These proposals don't punish law-abiding firearm owners. They are needed to reduce the supply of firearms to criminals who get them from licensed owners by theft or illegal dealings. Do get in touch if you have thoughts on that issue, the gun law reform. This is the second round of gun laws. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. National says it is unlikely to support that next lot of legislation. 22 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. There were emotional scenes inside a New York courtroom as up to 30 women who accused Jeffrey Epstein of sexual abuse gathered to tell their stories and express their anger. Epstein was facing sex trafficking charges, but the judge dismissed the criminal case against him after the wealthy financier killed himself this month while awaiting trial. The women said they felt cheated out of justice, with many labelling Epstein a coward. The BBC's Chris Buckler was there.
Jeffrey Epstein's victims came to court to be seen and, most importantly, heard. They once expected to be able to face the man who abused them. His death robbed them of that opportunity. But they told in graphic and upsetting detail the truth and impact of Epstein's crimes.
Before I knew what was happening, he grabbed onto my wrist and tugged me towards the bed. I was searching for words, but all I could say was a meek, no, please stop.
I wanted to thank the judge for letting us speak, having some closure. It's still going to be a rough road, but I also wanted to thank all the survivors that had reached out to me as well and telling me their stories.
Inside court, many of the women asked for their real names not to be used, but they became emotional and some broke down in tears as they talked about the crimes that they suffered at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein. They talked about being abused, exploited and manipulated by a man who they described as a complex villain. Epstein was accused of being a coward for taking his own life rather than face justice. But his lawyers said they had significant doubts about his death inside a jail in Manhattan. They claimed his injuries were more consistent with an assault. And they raised concerns about video footage from a corridor outside his cell in the prison. When they went to examine it, it was corrupted and couldn't be viewed.
Whether it was a suicide or murder does not end the case, does not end their fight for justice. It does not end their feeling that they were manipulated and victimized and that they were child victims of Mr. Epstein. So today they spoke truth to power. They spoke truth to what happened to them.
But questions remain for those who were once among Epstein's famous friends, including Donald Trump and the Duke of York. He has categorically denied allegations he had sex with a girl exploited by Epstein. Aria Roberts, who has made accusations against Prince Andrew, was among those at court.
He knows exactly what he's done, and I hope he comes clean about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Many of the victims are pursuing civil cases. Even if this criminal case is at an end, he may be dead. But today is unlikely to be the last day they speak of Jeffrey Epstein and his crimes.
And history teachers are making one last plea to the government to make sure every school student learns New Zealand's history. They argued at today's Education and Workforce Select Committee that learning about our shared history should not be a lucky dip depending on what school a student goes to. Political reporter Charlie Drever was there and filed this report.
High school student Christian Dennison says he was privileged his school taught him about the Treaty of Waitangi for a term in Year 10, but he says that's not enough.
So much of racism in New Zealand that is directed towards Māori comes from a place of ignorance. So many of the arguments that I hear are simply just false, they're not true. And the only way to solve that ignorance that comes from false past narratives is to re-educate.
At the Education and Workforce Select Committee today, those calls were echoed by the New Zealand History Teachers Association Chair, Graham Ball. He says history classes vary greatly from school to school.
It's rather like basing your financial well-being on a visit to the lotto shop each week. Will your child strike it lucky with a school and a social sciences department that overcomes the various obstacles, be they real or perceived, and so learn about our own shared past? Only luck will determine that.
Graham Ball wants New Zealand's shared history not just to be taught at NCA level, as that only reaches about 20% of students. He also wants younger students to learn from Year 7 to Year 10. He says the ministry has not been receptive and they've exhausted other options. But he says it's not too late for the minister to take action.
In terms of possibly setting some sort of unwanted precedent by adding some compulsion, a word they seem to resile from, the science and maths curricula are bursting with prescribed content, and rightly so. For these subjects, a platform is needed at one level before students can progress to the next. This is a desirable outcome. Students knowing their own past is an equally desirable outcome.
Across the political divide, Nationals leader Simon Bridges thought the New Zealand Wars should be compulsory curriculum.
It's important that people know their history. I certainly remember having the New Zealand Wars by James Ballanche as enriching. I think it was a very important part of our history, and I think we should be taught both history, New Zealand history, and specifically about the New Zealand Wars.
On the Select Committee is Nationals Education spokesperson Nikki Kay, who says New Zealand could do much better in this area, but the specifics are more complicated.
This petition, I hope, is a catalyst for change. It's an interesting timing because the government is expected to make some announcements around civics education. But I think that detail of how you would deliver it, whether it's through civics or whether it's through social studies, the age at which it's delivered, and how you ensure the resources get to the teachers is all up for debate.
Education Minister Chris Hipkins acknowledged history education in schools isn't equal.
Some New Zealand schools do an amazing job of teaching New Zealand history. The teachers really get into it. They really contextualise it locally. So if you're in the Waikato, you'll learn about the Waikato. If you're in Northland, you'll learn about the treaty grounds and the significance of them. If you're in Taranaki, you'll learn about Haka. That's going really well in some places, but others have got a way to go.
But the minister was keeping tight-lipped on what that means for bolstering up history in schools.
The work we're doing around civics education is part of the School Leavers Toolkit. The work that we're doing around New Zealand history in schools is a little different to that. And we will have more to say on the New Zealand history in schools thing soon, and we'll have more to say on the School Leavers Toolkit soon, but just not right now.
So only time will tell whether students learning their local background will become a right rather than a privilege. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
And let's return now to the story about the second round of gun law reform. National Party coming out today indicating it's unlikely to support that. Time for some more of your feedback. Christine has got in touch to say, I can't believe the bleating of the gun lobby, then the echo from Simon Bridges. Of course the police will make it tougher for people who misuse, steal or sell guns unlawfully. Dean has also got in touch and says Simon Bridges seems to be trying desperately to make a political issue out of anything that comes his way in the hope of finding something that will raise his marketability. However, Richard says, I know quite a few local police officers, not a single one of them is in favour of a gun register. Discipline prevents them speaking out publicly, but they say they have far too much to do already without being saddled with a whole new bureaucracy, which will do nothing useful since the people who register their guns are not the people they have to worry about. He says the first thing a thief does with a stolen gun is get his angle grinder out. 2 seconds later, no serial number. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A lengthy money laundering investigation has led to police in Auckland seizing millions of dollars worth of houses and cars and arresting 6 people. The number of cases of measles so far this year has been updated to 849, with Auckland health officials tonight confirming an outbreak at Manurewa High School. As the government prepares for the next round of new gun legislation, Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand has learnt the hard way that crimes happen as a result of relaxed gun laws. And the turning down of a hydroelectric power scheme proposed for the West Coast has annoyed coasters who say they'll be vulnerable when the Alpine Fault goes. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
The microplastic, which we don't really want to see, but today there were a couple of tiny pieces.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
With the internet and social media and everything, I started to find it a little bit harder to actually sit down